I first got sober 40 years ago and stayed sober for 30 years. That sentence sounds clean and victorious, like a plaque on a wall or a coin you carry in your pocket. It hides a lot of noise. Back then I was younger, scared enough to listen, and stubborn enough to follow instructions even when I didn't believe in them. Sobriety, for me, wasn't enlightenment or peace. It was survival. I stopped drinking because I had to, because the alternative was losing everything I hadn't yet realized I cared about. I learned routines. I learned rules. I learned how to not drink one day at a time, which slowly turned into weeks, years, decades. People called it a success story. I nodded and accepted the compliment, but I never looked too closely at what I had built in place of alcohol. What I built was work. Work gave me structure. It gave me an identity that sobriety alone never offered. I was reliable, productive, necessary. I could arrive early, leave late, and tell myself that exhaustion was virtue. The same obsessive energy that once chased the next drink now chased deadlines, responsibility, control. It worked. For a long time it worked very well. I stayed sober, I advanced, I accumulated proof that I was better. I didn't notice that I had simply moved the battlefield. Addiction hadn't left, it had changed uniforms. 30 years passed. Life did what life does. My body aged. My resilience thinned. The pressure I put on myself increased instead of easing, because easing felt like weakness. I told myself I had earned the right to push harder. Eventually the system failed. Burnout crept in quietly, not as collapse but as numbness. Sleep became shallow. Joy became theoretical. Problems multiplied and I lost the ability to absorb them. When alcohol reappeared, it didn't knock down the door. It whispered. I told myself I knew what I was doing. I had been sober for 3 decades. I understood the enemy. One beer, I thought, was not a betrayal but a tool. And it worked, at first. Beer softened the edges. It lowered the volume in my head. It made evenings bearable and nights passable. I believed I was managing it. That belief lasted just long enough to trap me. 10 years later, I was drinking again, and not because I wanted pleasure. I drank because it was the only thing that made the misery pause. Mornings came too early and nights never ended properly. I would wake at 3 or 4 in the morning with dread already fully formed, open a beer, smoke a cigarette, and wait for my hands to stop shaking. The medicine worked just enough to convince me to keep taking it. That is how addiction lies, not by promising happiness, but by offering temporary relief from despair. Over time, even that relief faded. What remained was a constant, grinding wish to not feel the way I felt. I didn't want to die so much as I wanted the pain to stop. But when pain seems permanent, the mind starts looking for exits that are not meant to be used. I felt lower than I had ever been, lower even than before my first sobriety. Back then I had youth and denial. This time I had age, shame, and the crushing knowledge that I had known better. When my wife told me to leave, it wasn't dramatic. There were no shouting matches or thrown objects. It was worse than that, calm, exhausted clarity. She was done watching me disappear. I didn't argue. Somewhere inside me, a small, sane voice recognized that this was not abandonment but a final boundary. I packed what I needed and went straight to a psychiatric emergency clinic for addiction. No detours. No bargaining. Just a quiet surrender. They accepted me. That still feels remarkable. On the first day of 2025, I woke up sober in a place that smelled of disinfectant and institutional coffee. It wasn't a fresh start in the romantic sense. It was more like being scraped off the bottom and hosed down. I needed jail and a general cleaning, which I did. The work is still ongoing. Early sobriety this time felt different. There was less illusion and more fear. I knew exactly how far I could fall, because I had just been there. I also knew that time alone did not equal immunity. 30 years had not protected me. That knowledge was humbling and terrifying. It forced me to admit something I had resisted all my life. I did not understand addiction as well as I thought I did. People ask, sometimes indirectly, whether anyone cares. The honest answer is complicated. Not everyone cares, and not everyone should. This is my story, not a demand for applause. But some people do care, quietly and steadily. They care enough to show up, to listen without fixing, to hold boundaries. They care enough to let me do my own work without rescuing me from its discomfort. That kind of caring is rare, and I am learning to recognize it without trying to repay it with performance. Right now, I am a winner whose legs are still shaking. I am sober, which is a victory. I am alive, which matters. But I am also standing in front of an invisible enemy that knows my habits better than I do. So I move forward cautiously, dressed in full combat gear. I do not trust sudden confidence. I respect routine. I assume that complacency is dangerous. My days look different now. In those early months of sobriety, I replaced the first beer with extended sleep. I replaced the second with coffee on the terrace. The third became morning exercise. The fourth turned into a proper breakfast. These substitutions felt almost magical. I watched sunlight move across the landscape and felt, for the first time in years, that the world might tolerate my presence. My body responded quickly. Sleep deepened. My face changed. My thoughts slowed enough to be examined. But addiction is clever, and it does not always wear the face you expect. Slowly, the view from the terrace disappeared behind a screen. Exercise shortened or vanished. Coffee remained, but now it fueled endless surfing of the web and non-stop work. The same old pattern returned, only without alcohol, for now. I recognized the danger immediately, and still struggled to stop it. That frightened me more than cravings ever did. Because I know this truth now, if I live the same way as before, alcohol will come back too. Sobriety is not just about removing a substance. It is about dismantling a lifestyle that required this substance to survive. When I work compulsively, ignore rest, avoid reflection, and live entirely in my head, I recreate the conditions that made drinking necessary. Alcohol was never the root, it was the symptom management. So I went back to my old notes, the ones I wrote decades ago and then abandoned because I thought I had outgrown them. I read them with different eyes this time. They were not naive or outdated. They were unfinished. I attend a therapy group regularly now, and I listen more than I speak. I hear my story echoed in different voices, with different details but the same emotional architecture. That shared recognition is grounding. It reminds me that this is not a personal failure but a human pattern. There are days when I feel strong, clear, almost serene. There are days when anxiety hums under my skin for no obvious reason. I am learning not to panic when that happens. Feelings are not instructions. Discomfort is not an emergency. This is new knowledge, and it takes repetition to sink in. I am also learning something harder, how to rest without guilt. How to be unproductive without self-contempt. How to exist without constantly proving my worth. These lessons do not come easily to someone who replaced alcohol with achievement. But they are essential. Without them, sobriety is just abstinence with better optics. My relationship with my wife is cautious, fragile, and honest in a way it has never been before. Trust does not return because I want it to. It returns, if at all, through consistent behavior over time. I accept that. Impatience has no place here. Some consequences cannot be rushed away. At 4 in the morning now, I wake with a full bladder and a cat that wants to go outside. This detail matters to me more than it probably should. It is ordinary. It is alive. It is not soaked in dread. I get up, open the door, listen to the quiet, and sometimes feel a brief, surprising gratitude for boredom. The work is still ongoing. I do not know what my life will look like in 5 years, or even 1. I no longer demand that certainty. What I know is this: I cannot outsmart addiction, but I can outlive it one honest day at a time. I can choose curiosity over certainty, humility over pride, connection over isolation. Does anyone care? Enough people care to make it worth continuing. More importantly, I am beginning to care in a way that is not conditional on performance or success. I care enough to protect my mornings. I care enough to ask for help before I am desperate. I care enough to admit that victory is not the absence of struggle, but the willingness to keep showing up despite it. This is not a triumphant ending. It is a stable one. I am sober. I am cautious. I am learning. The enemy is still invisible, but I am no longer pretending it isn't there. I stand on unsteady legs, yes, but I am standing. And for today, that is enough.